So today's lesson, I'm going to go over what is known as bus stop, which is a short division method. And that means that you are only ever dividing by one digit. I will also do a lesson after this one on long division and show you the difference, and that is when you're dividing by anything with more than one digit. So I think we call this the bus stop because it's like all of the numbers here are individually waiting in a line for you to deal with them by dividing by 8, and you treat them as individual numbers, even though actually we're doing the calculation 4,632 divided by 8. A key thing to remember is that division is actually repeatedly taking away, so repeated subtraction. So when you're dividing by 8, what that means is you are taking groups of 8 away from 4,632 in this example until you have nothing left or there is a remainder at the end. Another piece of information is remainders can be dealt with as whole numbers, I'll show you that, as fractions and decimals, and I'll show you those as well. Okay, so let's have a look at my example then. So what we are saying is we are calling this number 4, even though it's 4,000. And we are saying, how many groups of 8 can you take out of 4? Well, you can't take a group of 8 out of 4. I'll show you. Here's 4. Okay, 4 ones, and we can't take a group of 8 away from that because there's only 4 there. So what we do in this situation is now we actually call this number 46. Sometimes people do this to show that you couldn't take away 8 out of 4. That's fine, or you can just call it 46. 4 tens and 6 ones, but actually it's 4,600, remember. So now we're calling this number 46. We're saying how many groups of 8 can you take out of 46? So you have to know your 8 times table. And if you're counting in 8s, you'll know that the nearest you can get to that is 40, which is 5 groups of 8. 5 times 8, 8 times 5. So now you have the multiplication fact. 8 times 5 is 40. You know that you can take 5 groups of 8 away from 46. You can't take 6 groups out of 8 because that's 48, and that's too much. So you write the number 5 here because you can take 5 groups of 8 out of 46. But if you take 5 groups of 8, which is 40, out of 46, there'll be 6 left over, won't there? Because 46 subtract 40 is 6. So that remainder that's left over, you put in front of the 3 here. And now you've created a new number, 63. So far, what we have done is we've tried to take a group of 8 out of 4, and we couldn't do it. So now we made the number 46. And then we've worked out that you can take 8 times 5, which is 5 groups of 8, 40 away from 46. So you write the number on top, the multiplication fact on top that goes with that fact, 40. And then here you subtract the 40 from the 46, and that left 6. So now we need to know how many 8s are there in 63. How many groups of 8 can we take away from 63? Well, 8 times 8, 8 groups of 8 is 64. So that will be too many because we've only got 63. So 7 groups of 8 is 56. So we write the multiplication fact, or the groups of 8 on top, 7 times 8. And then we have to take away 56 from 63. Well, if you take 56 away from 63, you are left with 7. And then you put the number 7 here in front of the 2, 72. So now we have the division 8 into 72. How many groups of 8 can we take out of 72? And this is a nice one because if you know your 8 times table, 8 times 9 is 72. 9 groups of 8 is 72. So the fact that goes with that 8 is 9. So that's 9 groups of 8 we can take out of 72. And if you take the 72, 8 times 9 out of 72, you'll have nothing left because 72 subtract 72 is 0. So the fact 4,632 divided by 8 is actually 579. So if you multiplied, if you did the inverse, 579 times 8, you will be given the answer 4,632. So you can try it and see. And that is short division without any remainders. Now let's see what happens if we have a remainder. Back, let's have a look now what happens if you have a remainder. So what I have done here is I've changed my end digit, so we can whiz through these first steps. So step 1, we divide the first number inside by the number outside. 4 divided by 8. How many groups of 8 go into 4? And remember, there weren't any there, so we put the 4 here and made the number 46. Right, any remainders next to the digit being divided. So if we can't divide it, we treat it as a remainder and we write it in front of the next digit. Continue until all numbers have been divided. So now we're doing how many groups of 8 in 46? Remember, we took out 5 groups of 8, which was 40, and that gave us the remainder 6. And then we did how many groups of 8 in 63? So remember, 7 times 8 is 56. And when you take 56 away from 63, you're left with 7. So now we have a number 73. So remember, in our last calculation, that was 72. And we didn't have any remainders because 8 times 9 is 72. But we can use that fact to help us, 8 times 9. Because that's going to be the nearest fact to take out of 73. 8 times 9 is 72. So we put the 9 on top here. But when you've taken 72 away from 73, 73 take away 72, you are left with 1. Now, you can show that as a whole number with a little r to show remainder and 1. And normally in lower key stage 1, that's exactly how you're supposed to express your remainders when dividing using bar stop, just as a number. But when you get into upper key stage 2, you're asked to show it as a fraction and sometimes a decimal. That's more like year 6. So what you're saying is actually as a fraction, you're saying you have 1 left out of the 8 you're dividing. And if you know about fractions, and there will be lessons on fractions, when you divide by a number, we call that the denominator, and that is the number that is the bottom number in a fraction. So what we're saying is we have 1 left out of the division that we're doing, so it's an 1/8. So it's 579, and an 1/8 is showing that remainder as a fraction. So if you're showing it as a decimal, what you're actually doing is you're doing 1 divided by 8. And the most simple way to do that is to put a decimal point here, because actually what you've got is that's your whole number, and then you're breaking your number up into tenths and hundredths. And there will be lessons on decimals in my other videos, which you can have a look at. But let's just look at it in the division terms. So at the moment, you don't have any tenths and you don't have any hundredths, because what you actually have essentially is the number 4,633. But when you had your remainder here, and your remainder here was 1, you can put the 1 here. But it is now not a whole number anymore, it's a decimal. So therefore, you can put a decimal point here to show actually my number is now going to be shown as decimals. I'm now going into tenths and hundredths. So, but now you carry on as if it was your division. How many 8s into 10? Well, you can take 1 group of 8 out of 10, and then there would be 2 left over, because 10 take away 8 is 2. And you would put that here in front of your hundredth. And then you say, how many 8s are there in 20? Well, the nearest you can get in the 8 times table to 20 is 16, and that's 8 times 2, 2 groups of 8. So you would put your 2 groups of 8 here. And notice I would then have 4 left over, because if I'm taking 16 away from 20, which is 8 groups of 2 groups of 8, there'll be 4 left over. So I've now got thousandths. And what I'm going to do is extend my division bar here at the top, my division bar here. So now I'm saying how many 8s in 40? So here, that is 5. You can take 5 groups of 8 out, and 5 times 8 is 40. So I put my division factor at the top, but it's actually 5 thousandths, remember. And if I took 40 away, there would be 0 left. So I can stop. Whenever you have 0 left, you can stop. Now, normally when you get to year 6, you will probably just have questions where you would have 2 decimal places. That means a remainder that's going to have a tenth and a hundredth. You wouldn't normally go into thousandths, but I'm just showing you what you would do. And if you were continuing to have remainders, stop and just stop at the, round it to the nearest 2 here. I would, a tenth and a hundredth. But remember, that's much more complicated if you're getting on to dividing by decimals, and in no SATs paper yet to date have I seen any questions where when you're dividing you'll be left with decimals, but I've just showed you how to do it. Oh, excuse me. So you can show decimals as whole numbers, which was remainder 1, as fractions, which is 1/8, so the remainder goes over what you're dividing by, the denominator, or as decimals by continuing the zeros to show tenths, hundredths and thousands, but continuing to follow this pattern until you have 2 decimal places. So our whole answer, 4,633 divided by 8, is 579.125. Okay, so that's division, bus stop.